And I want to spend a few minutes. It's going to be boring for you now. It's been fun till now. But this is going to be boring because I want to tell you a little bit about my efforts to support an impartial and independent judiciary. That's been my role, and I'm working on it now. But I want to tell you how often in the last month or so my thoughts and prayers have been with this area after the severe weather damage that was inflicted on you. And believe me, I know the terrifying power of nature. We face drought and floods and wind and rain and lightning and all of that. And my heart does go out to the victims and relatives of the victims of these tragedies here in this state. And my best wishes as you try to rebuild and replace what's damaged. And I know you're coming together in a wonderful way to form an even stronger and more vibrant community than ever. And you've done pretty well on that score already, but my thoughts and prayers are certainly with you. Now, my topic today is really the fair and impartial and independent judiciary. That's been my focus for more than the last 25 years, and it's important to every one of us here. Unfortunately, we are dependent on having judicial involvement and enforcement of some of the principles on which we founded our nation, and it's still vitally important. And I think that our judicial system has been a model for many parts of the world today, to provide a place where anyone may come as an equal for a fair hearing in front of an unbiased judge or jury and seek protection of those rights which have been awarded to the citizens by our country. And I think we've worked together pretty well. The idea that judges should be independent and free of politics and partisan fights has set our country apart, really, from many other nations, and it's been copied in many parts of the world. I think it's a product of our own constitutional history and our legal system and our notion of judicial ethics. And I want to talk to you just a little about how we created and maintained this system, as well as maybe a couple of ways where we could do better. Now, we have a serious problem today because many people in our country think of judges as just politicians in robes. They do. And they're often called judicial activists or godless secular humanists trying to tell the rest of us what to do. So I worry that that ideal of having your day and time in court or having the merits of your issue or case decided without prejudice is being eroded somewhat by the threats to judicial independence. Now, many Americans don't see the need today for independent judges. They would prefer a judiciary that acts as a reflex of popular will. And this is not the right approach to maintenance of the system that was created in our country and that has served us well. Now, first and most important, I think, is the individual ethic and notion of impartiality among our judges. We want them to decide cases and issues before them impartially. And there are many ways in which judges can and must ensure for themselves that they maintain an open mind about the issues that come before them and decide these matters impartially. And then we also care about the structures of our judicial system, the creation of an independent system. And the federal system is structured that way, and our state systems are too. But believe me, there are efforts to change that, and you have to be on guard and you have to care about it and maintain what we have. And judges will maintain their independence, and we will maintain our independent system if our political community understands that the measure of a great judge is not how often she agrees with you, but how fairly she approaches the parties and the cases before the judge. And that includes the male judges, too. So, now the first major ethic that I want to just mention is the ethic of impartiality. And judges obviously should try their best to make themselves fair and impartial decision makers of the disputes before them. And that begins with a pair of promises. Our Constitution requires that all federal officers take an oath to support our Constitution. And the wording of that was left up to Congress. So today, every federal judge takes the very same oath as do local clerks and postmasters and any other federal official. And we all are pledged to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same. Congress created, in addition, a special oath for judicial officers. And as it's worded, it says, all federal judges swear they will administer justice without respect to persons, do equal right to the poor and to the rich, and faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all duties incumbent upon them as judges under the Constitution and laws of the United States. Now, these promises are what all federal judges must strive to do. And promises are easier made than kept. But there's some obvious things that judges must not do. You don't hear a case when some relative of yours is one of the parties in the case. What about the case that concerns a company when you happen to know the president of the company? You're not related to him, it's just casual, but you know him. What should you do? Should you be recused or not? I mean, judges face questions like that very frequently, and it's an important matter of public concern. Justice Thurgood Marshall, who was the first African American appointed to the Supreme Court, in large part, he was appointed because of his incredible work for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. And he represented the plaintiffs in the case of, for instance, Brown versus Board of Education to make schools fair and impartial. And he felt that he had to recuse himself from all the cases involving the NAACP for much of the time that he was on the court. But after the passage of many years on the court and a lot of thinking about it, he finally, while I was sitting on the court with him, changed his mind, and he did sit in some cases involving the NAACP. But I think by that time he really had reached the stage where he could do that fairly and impartially, and he did so. And I think the best that judges can do is to turn a high-powered lens back on themselves and try as hard as possible to practice good judgment about when their own impartiality might be compromised or questioned. And in doing that, you have to consider not only your own biases, but the appearances that are there that other people have of seeing you as a judge sit on the case. And it may be that a judge can be wholly impartial, maybe like John Marshall and Thomas Jefferson, being cousins doesn't make for a good relationship. But it won't do to have the public see a judge participating in a case involving the judge's relatives. So these are obvious, but there are a lot of more subtle issues as well. Now, one of the things that as a justice on the court I had to do was hire law clerks, and they're very much involved with the justices in working on the merits of every case that comes before the judge. And the involvement of the law clerks matter because they do a lot of research and bring it to the attention of the judge. Maybe you'd find it all anyway, but there's an awful lot there to find. And I was appointed by a Republican president. My very first law clerk that I hired has now been appointed as a United States Court of Appeals judge, which was exciting. And President Obama has now nominated 3 of my former law clerks for the U.S. Court of Appeals. One is Bert Jordan, a Cuban refugee, who's now a judge on the 11th Circuit. One is Richard Toronto, who was confirmed for the Federal Circuit. And one is Sri Srinivasan of Indian heritage, who was just last week confirmed 97-0 for a seat on the D.C. Circuit. Now, having clerks of diverse backgrounds, as they have had, and politics, allowed me to feel pretty sure I was getting a broad mix of advice and hearing the best arguments on both sides of every case, which is what I tried to do. So judges have to seek out opportunities to be sure they hear the views of those on the other side of the issue, not just one side. And this individual ethic of impartiality is critical to a fair and well-functioning judicial system. So I think we've done a fairly good job in the United States on developing such a system, and we need to preserve that. Now, judicial independence has a long history in this country. One of the main grievances that the early colonists had against King George in the Declaration of Independence involved the absence of judicial independence in colonial America. They thought the king was sending over the judges and they were biased, and that was that. But I think we've gotten over that problem and are doing rather well, I'd say, in that regard. Our Constitution creates a system of federal judges that are not elected, and their only allegiance is to the Constitution and laws of the United States. And the judges, the federal judges, are shielded from politics, and this is good. It's not true in all states that we have the same kind of a system. I know in my home state of Arizona, it's not the case. They're appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the state senate. And I don't know, I suppose there's some political issues in some of those appointments, and perhaps you see those here in Oklahoma as well. But the trust that our citizens place in judges and in our judicial system as an institution makes it very important that we have fair and impartial processes for selecting the best judges we can. And it isn't true in all parts of the United States that we've done that, but I think that's something that all of us can be aware of and work on as we go forward. I certainly care about it in my state. Now, subjecting judges to the political pressures of campaigns, as many of our states still do, they make them run for office and be elected. And I think that's a very risky system to have fundraising and contributions for judicial elections and partisan election of judges. Maybe it does make judges more responsive to the public they serve, but I think being part of a good judge and following the law, even when the public doesn't like it, is what's in front of us, and the benefits are very important. A number of recent studies show that judges are influenced by campaign contributions. So if you're in a state that still has popular election of judges, I think that's a serious concern. And judges who need to raise money to get or keep their jobs have a hard time living up to the promise to provide justice without regard to persons and to do so to the rich and poor alike. I think that's very much of a concern. 70% of our public perceives judges to be influenced by campaign contributions, if that's the system the state has. So thankfully, we don't do it in my state, you don't do it in your state, but my goodness, we have other areas in this country where that is the system. Now, I would like to see more states move in the direction of how we select judges at the federal level and in the federal system. And merit systems or unopposed retention elections help reduce the power of money and politics in this area. I just want to emphasize that the way that our legal systems in the various states structure the judiciary is terribly important in assuring certainly the appearance of impartiality, and I think even the operation of the courts themselves. So that's one of the things that I have worked on very hard since leaving the court. And you can't please all of the people all of the time, we know that, and it's especially true for judges. They're constantly disappointing at least half the people that come before them because somebody has to lose. But it's worse when it comes to public opinion because the rule of law often requires judges to do the opposite of what many, if not most, of the public wants. We have to learn to appreciate judges for the effort they make and what they do, and not to attack every judge who puts out an opinion with which we disagree. There's nothing wrong with criticizing judges, of course. That's fair, they're fair game, and they can make mistakes, especially when they rule in politically noteworthy cases and the public wants to discuss the work of the judges. But I think the discussion today in many states about judicial decision-making is more and more politicized. So I'm hoping that long-term we can do better. And citizens have to be taught to recognize that there are great judges who don't share all their instincts about the law, in part so that judges can try to be recognized according to their judicial skill and not their partisan credentials. And that's terribly important. The long-term solution, of course, is education. And I think all young people, all voters, all policymakers should be informed about the importance of having a fair and impartial judiciary. And they have to come to understand that the rule of law means that sometimes judges do precisely the opposite of what a majority of the public may want at the time. And we have to bring civics education back in our classrooms. And that's where, as a nation, we're failing. And that's where I've been spending much of my time lately, to try to bring back civics education in ways that will reach all of the public. We have a website now, www.iCivics.org. We have iPads and iPods and all that stuff, and we now have iCivics. And it's a great website, and I hope that you will get your children and grandchildren on it. It's wonderful, and it has a lot of games that they love to play, and in the process, they're going to learn a lot. But it's so important that we do. Not even 1/3 of 8th graders, and all 8th graders in the nation were surveyed, could identify the historical purpose of the Declaration of Independence, and it's right there in the name. They couldn't say it. Only 1/3 of Americans today can name the 3 branches of government, let alone say what each branch does. Now that's scary. We can't have that in a democratic system. And citizens are learning about politics from acerbic television ads. I think it's no wonder that we don't appreciate, as a nation today, judicial independence and are more inclined to criticize any judge whose particular decision you might disagree with. Well, anyway, our schools have to educate a very diverse population these days. And they were founded to help create citizens with the skills and ability to sustain and strengthen our democracy. And civics education was the original reason for creation a system of public education. That's why we got public schools in the first place. So we mustn't forget that, and we have to sustain efforts to teach all young people how our government works and how they're part of it. So help me do that. Get all the young people you know or know of to use iCivics, tell their schools they need to do it, and let's try to maintain fair and impartial courts in the way they were designed. I think that would be great. And I think you're doing pretty darn well here in Oklahoma. I don't know if we're doing as well in Arizona, but I'm certainly trying out there, and maybe you can spread the word if you do better, which I think you can. And I'm very proud to be a visitor on a number of occasions to this marvelous state. I like the people you have in leadership positions here. I like what you're doing, and I want to help in any way I can. So keep me posted. Keep me on your website, okay? And communicate with me and tell me how iCivics is going to help you in the long run, because I have some ideas for you on that, okay? Thanks for letting me come today.